Thank you. It's so great to be here. I have so many wonderful memories from this place, and I got to park right in front of my sophomore dorm, Yost House, for those of you guys that know this area. So very happy to be here. And you're exactly right. In starting the company, I think I broke every rule possible of investing in business school. So my first job after undergrad was as a venture capitalist in private equity. And it's really one of the reasons why I got, I think, the confidence to start a company during business school. It was just that exposure to seeing so many different companies and talking to so many different CEOs and saying, like, okay, these people are impressive, but I could do this. I could do this at some point. And just to be around the enthusiasm of entrepreneurs versus necessarily the investing kind of track that I was on really inspired me to take the plunge while I was in business school. But I do have to say I broke every rule, which is, what I was trained for was don't do capital-intensive businesses. Don't get involved with regulated businesses. Don't get involved with operationally intensive business. You need something with a moat. You need something that has a network effect. And this is definitely not that. It's been a very rewarding 13 years, but 13 very much dog years. And I'm right in it right now. So bring the Q&A. I'm living it. We're still in the intense formation of this business, even though it's 13 years old. So today, can I get just a quick hands? How many people are MBAs? Okay, all the MBAs are sitting in the back, by the way. Okay, and then there's the MS&E grad students.
Engineering.
Oh, and engineering. Okay, got it. Great. Well, so I'll mix it up a little bit. I'm going to talk a bit about the utility industry, which is really what we're helping to shape and evolve. I'm going to talk a little bit about the formation of the company. I'll sprinkle some stories in there as well. And it's really an exciting time to be doing this, and it's an important time. So just to kick it off, I think a lot of us know why this is so important. I was just listening to this podcast with Saul Bellow called, what was it exactly called? How to Fix Climate Change and Make Life More Awesome. Has anyone listened to this? It's really good. It's exceptional, actually. And it's a theme that I really like to emphasize. And as we get into this, a lot of our peers and a lot of environmentalists, like so much of their message is like, you have to restrict. You have to constrain. Life is worse somehow. And if we're going to solve this problem, it's just, life is going to be a little bit worse. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. But we have to make some serious changes. I mean, I think just a couple facts, which you guys will all be well aware of, but if you just look at the existing machinery that is out there in the world, and just in the fossil power plants, and you just amortize those out, we're already at 1.5 degrees. So we're already with the existing infrastructure there. So it's almost like we got to make perfect decisions from now on, here on out, in order to do this. That's the urgency. This is a real kind of wartime effort. It should be taken that seriously. And so when we founded the company, the thesis was, Ed Fenster and I, we were both environmentalists. We both saw that so much investment was going into solar panels, into the actual hardware of solar energy. We saw the cost curves. We looked at that and we said, okay, some smart people, probably from the engineering school here, are going to solve the hardware problem. It's just you see these patterns in the hardware getting cheaper and more efficient across all industries. But the real unlock for solar and other renewable resources is going to be the financing and the business model innovation. And that has really continued to be true. And so when we looked at solar, we said, okay, where do we want to play this angle? And we decided to focus on the consumer. And the reason we focused on the consumer was a couple-fold. One, we believe that it just, from a first principle standpoint, it makes sense to produce the electricity actually where it's being used. It's got to be more efficient there. And what's so breakthrough about solar is that it can be distributed. You can have a minimum efficient scale. You don't have to build power plants and big transmission lines in the same way that we used to. And that was a really novel idea, and one that a lot of people just kind of ignored at the time. So, just like any new technology, when it comes into an industry, people often use the same models as before. They don't really take advantage of the full technology to unlock new business models. So there were a lot of competitors of ours figuring out how to build large-scale solar farms. But people weren't paying attention to this homeowner thing, and we said, oh, that's where it's going to hit grid parity first. And by the way, if you want to change people's behavior, you got to go to people, because they're going to vote for the right thing. They're going to influence the politics. Like, this is going to be the market where, and then from a business model standpoint, you can set up a business that we thought had more entry barriers. So it would be, with a business where you're targeting consumers, you can build barriers like a brand, like a distribution model. And so you want to build the operating infrastructure so each incremental customer is cheaper, versus a lot of the big scale solar farms, which are just, they're just development projects that are going to trade at a cost of capital. So that was the original thesis. Okay, change is really going to happen first micro. Residences pay the most money for power, so you're going to go there first. And we can build a defensible business model around that. And it mostly turned out to be true. And with the advent of batteries, like I'm going to talk about now, we're just really at the beginning of some exciting electrification and decarbonization potentials in this country and beyond. What was different about what happened, unlike we were expecting, was I think we raised $300 million before our IPO of equity capital, so 5 rounds of venture capital. I think in every single round where we had a term sheet, we thought we were fully funded. It's like starting at that Series A. So we got that first $27 million. This is all we're going to need to get this business up and running. Okay, now it turns out $300 million, IPO for another $250 million later, and now today we've raised probably about $6 billion of project finance. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I'm going to pull it back for a second here and just talk about the utility industry, because not only do we need to decarbonize, and one of the ways to decarbonize is to build in distributed renewable resources like solar and batteries, but we also are just completely inefficient. Just if you forget the carbon and you forget that that whole non-market piece of it, our utility industry has not innovated much. And so if you look over the last 100 years, it really hasn't changed all that much. And the costs continue to increase. At the same time, electricity usage has really been flat. And so what's interesting, and I'll show you we'll get into the cost side in a second, but I want to flip forward to one slide here. What's happened over the last 10 years is that utility prices have continued to increase, but we've been able to absorb those because we've been selling more power. Over the last 10 years, that stopped being true. Energy efficiency, other matters, we've started to be flat in terms of the amount of power that's being sold. At the same time, the wholesale cost of power got really, really cheap with all the fracking and the natural gas. So what you see is this just takes an Arizona utility, but this is really illustrative of the entire country. Their actual wholesale costs have come down about 40% over that time period. Yet the retail costs are still up. And that's because our infrastructure is really, really underinvested in. So whereas before, when you bought your kilowatt hours at home, you used to spend 2/3 of your power was the cost of the fuel, and 1/3 was the transmission and distribution. Now that's completely shifted. So 2/3 of the cost of the electricity is transmission distribution, 1/3 is power, which is why it makes it even the value proposition of siting it directly where you are even that much stronger. So I think the average rate, the average cost to deliver the power in the US is about 8 cents per kilowatt hour. 8 cents per kilowatt hour just to deliver it. So if you're already rooftop solar in Mexico, in Australia, and some other markets where it's cheaper, already beats that. Already beats it. And we are about to spend over the next 100 years. I hope we're still here in 100 years. Over the next 10-year period, I think $1 trillion in energy infrastructure upgrades. And so that's one of the messages that I really want to make, is that at the same time this is happening, and all the projections show that that's going to continue to happen to retail prices and I'm not even getting into extreme weather and when that's done and the need to harden the grid. This is even before all of that stuff. All of that's happening at the same time. Look at the cost of batteries and the cost of solar panels. So the structural advantage of these distributed solar and batteries is going to beat retail power. And so there's all sorts of like policy things tied up into this, and it's only a matter of time before that happens, and it'll happen in certain markets faster than others. But by our math, so this is done by, I believe, Rocky Mountain Institute. This is a third party, which will show you that here's the cost of grid power. This is in Westchester County, so this isn't even in, this is in a less sunny, less insulation type market, but expensive power because transmission is expensive there. But you can see here that the solar plus storage is going to beat grid power even if you fully pull it off the grid. So that's where there's a source of a lot of these conflicts right now. So we have our customers. Our customers get their power from solar energy, but they're also hooked up to the grid. So there's all sorts of disputes about that. When the home's not using all of the power and is flowing back to the grid, how much credit should the homeowner get for that? Should it be at retail? Should it be at wholesale? Should it be at some avoided cost of transmission distribution? Lots of fights on that. But we're really thinking, my message to people is like, we're thinking way too short term, because we're making infrastructure decisions right now. Power plants are going to be supposed to be operating for 30, 40, 50 years. Those will be obsolete. They will be obsolete, and it will be more cost effective for homeowners to defect off the grid. So we're at risk of building two infrastructures that aren't talking to each other. And that's part of the business model challenge that we're trying to solve right now, is how do we give our customers what we want, go direct to consumers, over the top, outside of the utility, to say, hey, you want a superior power source, you want solar plus batteries, but we want to be smart about that to integrate it into the infrastructure, because there are bigger problems for us to collectively solve. And so there's really a lot of interesting disputes about this, because, and this is why it's very much with all due respect to like the engineers and the physicists, like the technologies exist to make massive impact on climate. If you covered all the rooftops in the US, it would give you half of the power need. So half, a huge percentage. The technology exists there. It's really policy and will that interferes. And the problem is that we've set up the business model for the utilities to make money off of investing in infrastructure. That's how they make money. And that made sense when they were monopolies. They had to go out and make an investment, and they could return that cost of the investment across all of their customers. But now there are choices. But yet we haven't evolved the regulatory model. So now if businesses like ours are actually making it such that we don't need to build as much infrastructure, it's just completely at odds with each other. So I'm so I'm very sympathetic actually to the business model of the utilities, but we need to do better on this, because they're out there building more and more and more and more of this. It's not going to be needed. And so how do we affect that change? What are the right policies to do that? And how does that unfold? So that's a huge piece of where we spend sort of our innovation and our time, is really thinking about those business models. And then we obviously know all about this. Like all of the math and all of the statistics that you see in there don't even presume anything about what's happening in PG&E or with the wildfires or with the shutoff, and how this is the new normal, and how expensive is it going to be to harden the grid for these type of activities. Huge. I think PG&E's estimate for burying a power line like a mile is $1 million or something like that. It's a big, huge expense. You can see Long Island is interesting. You know that in Long Island, they actually, at the LIPA, the utility company there, actually at the beginning of the summer just brings in diesel generators, because they know they're not going to meet peak demand. Let's see. What do I want to hit next? This is pretty cool. So in 2006, this was like right about when we were getting started with the company, Governor Schwarzenegger comes out and says, we're going to have 1 million solar roofs in California. Everybody thought this guy was totally crazy. And we hit it in 2016. We hit it in actually 10 years. And it took 40 years to hit the first million solar roofs. And then it took 4 years to hit the second million. So that's how quick of a ramp that we're on. Here's just a quick snapshot at our particular growth. So as I've said, we've nicely grown through a pretty tumultuous industry at times, and have 250,000 roughly happy customers, but just feel like we're barely scratching the surface. Like I said, I think if you look at the penetration of rooftop solar, across the US, it's 2-3% of single family houses. But if you look at markets where the value proposition was strongest first, so Hawaii is a place where strong value proposition, because they still get powered by about 75% fossil fuels, all imported. It's very expensive there. They're already at 40-ish% rooftop solar. Australia is similar in many places. California is probably about 13-14% single family homes. And across the country is too. So again, lots of room to continue to grow. Really important that we do so. So then I wanted to, here's just a little bit about our growth. This is our density of our customers over the years. On the right here is batteries. So I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about batteries too, because batteries are really unlocking a lot of power here in terms of the ability to replace traditional infrastructure. And these are our solar customers just in California. Okay, so batteries. So here's another thing about batteries. There's obviously been a ton of investment in batteries given electric vehicles, and they're getting much more efficient. And we also believe that there's a lot of utilities that are putting batteries way out front of the meter, like close to the power plants, which makes sense in many cases to balance the load. But it really makes sense to, again, site them at the distribution system, because there's extra value proposition if you have your battery with your rooftop in your house. So the first is, one, you can help manage peak. So I think we all study energy around here, so we know that the energy industry is one of the lowest utilization of any CapEx of any industry. Because again, it's been built with these one-way power flows. It's been built to hit peak demand. So you have to have enough power plants to hit that one, July afternoon when everyone's pumping air conditioning. So you have just countless gas plants that run 2% of the time. I mean, it's so completely inefficient. And so what you can do with the battery is, what we're starting to do is take all of our batteries and network them, and then coordinate with the utility to actually replace the need for that peaking power resource to come on. So these are called virtual power plants. That's the term for this. But again, this is fraught with conflict, because if the utility doesn't need to build that plant, they don't make money. So it's a very, very, very flawed model. And also so many of the regulatory rules are written where they just didn't even anticipate these type of resources. So there's no mechanism to price or compensate for an individual homeowner to shift power back to the grid, to flow it to the neighboring home. And that's really a shame. That's why I feel like if anybody here, we need really smart people to go into the utility commissions and these areas. It's where a lot of this is getting done. And the other reason why it makes sense to put the battery on the sited with the rooftop is that homeowners are willing to pay for a piece of it because of the reliability. So getting back to, so it's a more efficient place to put it. So there's probably about 3 million generators out there, and PG&E I think turned the power off 10 times last summer for an average of I think 36 hours. So it starts to get really meaningful. That's not stopping. There's no solution to that. So that's the next decade here certainly, and that's only happening. Nevada is starting to see it as well. That's going to happen in other markets as well. So one of the other benefits is that you stay up and running. So during those power outages, our average customer powered through the whole thing. Didn't even notice, and it's much superior to a generator, because a generator also, one, it's noisy, it burns fuel, and even some of the stations that you would need to buy the fuel for the generator are shut when the power's off. So like you may not even get access to it. And so it confounds me that we still, when these outages are out there, it's like everyone thinks generator. It's like, don't think generator, think solar and a battery. It's a better solution. And so we even get in arguments with PG&E. They're sending marketing materials out, buy a generator, buy a generator, buy a generator. Because the generator's not as competitive. It doesn't replace as much of the infrastructure, which is what we want to be able to do here to actually electrify. So I'm super excited about the promise of batteries. And it's absolutely just getting started. So we're just at the beginning of getting that cost curve down. So let me just show you here too. This also just shows you batteries where you're siting them at the utility scale side is the gray piece. And then the dark blue is commercial applications, and then the light blue is residential. So you can see the residential is continuing to really grow here. And again, I think that will only increase because of those three pieces of the value proposition that it brings when you put it distributed. So again, it helps bring resiliency to the home. It helps congestion on the distribution system, not just the transmission system. And it helps you, if you aggregate them, it helps you peak shave. So there's three, value propositions there. And then what's so interesting about the battery is that it is what has been happening to prevent the proliferation of solar is that a lot of places have started to change the rate structures and really penalize people for either with demand charges, maybe I'm using too much, I'm trying not to use too much jargon, but actually like start to play games with the rate structures to make it not affordable for people to put solar. Either don't give fair credit for the exported power or charge power at different prices at different points of time that make it uneconomic. And that's been like a tactic. So the Edison Electric Institute, which is the utility trade group, like publishes these tactics, which they by the way, charge, like all that consulting gets, you pay for that in your bill. And then McKinsey did this paper, which is like the battery makes that game unwinnable because now you can arbitrage it. You can store the power and export it when you want to. That's sort of the negative way to look at it. The positive way to look at it is you can put rate structures in place that really encourage somebody who adopts solar and a battery and an electric vehicle, which I'll talk about a little bit, to coordinate and export it when the grid most needs it. So, in California, we have so much solar during the middle of the day that when we actually need the power, when it's most expensive, is 4 to 7. So it's, the ramp. So we've now moved to these sort of rate structures where the power is really cheap during the day and it's really expensive 4 to 7. And that sets a market signal where companies like us can innovate and say, okay, great, we'll put the battery on, and then we'll program all of our batteries to export to the grid at 4 to 7. So you're using your solar all day. Instead of exporting it when the grid has enough power, you store it, you coordinate it, and then you export it at 4 to 7 when it's really expensive to produce. And it's a win-win because it's a lower overall cost for the entire system. So that's where I'm getting back to. We need to continue to set up the business model and the regulatory frameworks to have those to have the two systems talking to each other. The distributed system that's fed by this competitive market that I compete in, and the monopolistic utility system. So it's really tricky stuff though, and it's I wouldn't have known that we would have had to build up such a policy, from a business model standpoint, like such a heavy spend in policy and intervening in rate cases and a lot of this stuff. What else? So this is just the math. So it makes sense to electrify the house. So if you look at, so there's a lot of numbers on here, but this is a smart crowd. So if you look at the total monthly energy spent on the left, if you have the car, you have your electricity usage, you have your heating, 421. Then we've said, okay, our customers today, they're not all on electric vehicles. Actually, there are more solar homes than electric vehicles. Many people don't know that. It's actually it's historically grown faster than electric vehicles. And if you look at our customer today, you can see that even our And I should back up a second. Like the real innovation that we brought to the market was selling solar as a service. So before us, homeowners, we were like at Stanford. It's like a SaaS business model. Okay, come on, that's like the future. So we invented the model where we would pay to install the system on the homeowner roof. Sometimes people call it solar leasing. I hate that term because we really do a lot more than that. We actually own and take care of the system and then just sell the electricity at a fixed price to the homeowner. Today, we already can do that with a battery at 20 cents a kilowatt hour. So 0 upfront cost for a homeowner and 20-cent power versus what they're currently paying PG&E at 25. So it's already cheaper. So, again, major misconception. And again, we're just only at the beginning of that learning curve. So you can see we're able to drop the monthly energy spend already just by replacing the electricity with the solar and a battery. Then you get the car in there, you get a bigger system. So that's good. That's also good for my business. You want to sell bigger systems, and good for the environment. It's a win-win. And then you still don't have the heating converted. Now you fast forward, you convert the heat, and there's a lot of the home builders really want to eliminate the gas line from the new homes as well. And it's interesting. Like when you talk to them, the reason why they can't is cooking. So it's really cooking. And so everybody here, get over the gas stove. We don't need the gas stove. Like in Europe, they got over that a long time ago. And so they really said it's actually particularly an Asian population with woks. I guess there's we need an induction wok thing. But it is really the use case that a lot of builders say. But if we can do a couple of these big things like electrify our transportation, electrify our heating, we can get there on the climate. And all the technologies are available today. This is just purely a business model, regulatory, consumer will situation because it's cheaper. It's cheaper to do it. I was going to say something else about that. But let's get back to why we're getting in our own way. So as I mentioned earlier, the cost to already transmit the power in the US is 8 cents a kilowatt hour. In Europe, Australia, Mexico, it's already cheaper to do that. They're installing at, instead of 20 cents a kilowatt hour for this, they're installing at, that's kind of 7, 8 level. Why? Labor costs the same, hardware costs the same. The reason why it's so hard in the US is because we have these patchwork regulations everywhere. And so what we've done as a country, which has made us strong in many ways, was really distribute down some of these decisions to local governments. And so what we have now, what makes our business model quite challenging, is that when we go from Menlo Park to Palo Alto, the Menlo Park permitting department is going to tell you, nope, you need to have 4 feet of space on your eave to your panels because there's some horror story about a fire back in 1906 when San Francisco had a fire. I mean, this stuff is really, really, really outdated, and it varies from place to place. So we can't standardize our designs. So we have to we go to a homeowner, and then maybe we didn't anticipate some peculiarity of this place. We have to redesign it. We go back to the homeowner. It takes us 90 days to do it. Did you live this?
100%.
Yeah, it's crazy. All other markets treat it like an appliance. And so what happens is the cost is half because you don't have all this customer confusion, you don't have all this rework. You can sell and install it in a week so people don't change their mind and get busy. But we've injected all of this complexity unnecessarily. And then we also require the electrical panel. So one of the things that's making this not happen is that we require the electrical panel to meet the entire demand all at the same time. So they'll run the code where you're charging your car and you're heating the hot tub and you're cooking and you're running the dryer all at the same time. You got to size the panel to that instead of saying, okay, we can be smart about it. We can program it so that you're not running the hot tub if you're if you're getting up there. So it's there's a lot of really rules like this that are stopping this. So this is another thing. You care about we care about this stuff. We need our lawyers. We need our government employees. We need people to cut through this stuff. Because it is crazy, and it is literally 40% cheaper to install solar in Europe. And if we could get it there, I mean, compared to how much spend there is and CapEx there is in our utility industry, back to what we were talking about, we could have a way more cost-effective, much higher resiliency system. So it's boring, it's kind of boring stuff, but literally, I was talking to Tesla, and literally Elon Musk calls up these local permitting people, as do I. We like you, Nassau County, okay guys, okay, your 17 electrical checks aren't necessary. So that's a lot of the work that we do to evangelize this stuff. So not really sexy per se, but really, really impactful. So this is a cool future. So here's what we've done on the virtual power plant. So we've really been the innovators on setting up these virtual power plants. So here are some of the early victories. So again, a decent amount of jargon in here, which I'll try to avoid, but this is the most jargony one. So this is the New England grid. And we bid for we're the first distributed residential company to actually bid into the wholesale market for capacity, for firm capacity in the wholesale market. And we competed against fossils, and we won. So we are putting batteries on 5,000 homes, and we're going to dispatch them when they need the power and coordinating with that utility to meet the peak power needs. So what we'll be able to do now is go to a homeowner. It's kind of like sharing economy. Okay, so you're homeowner, you have your solar, you have your battery. You're going to want your battery 4 times a year when the power gets shut off. But it's otherwise being wasted. So why not share it and give some economic value to the homeowner for their willingness to share it, give some economic value to us for aggregating the whole thing, and it's a win-win. So these are the types of programs that we're advocating across the country, and this was our really big first one. So we're going to be, so the importance of this can't be understated, because that's one of the other ways that we get blocked is that, can we really rely on these things? And there's been this history of demand response that hasn't, where you've asked homeowners to turn down their thermostat or make other behavior changes that haven't been as successful or as predictable. But that's what's so great about the battery too. Getting back to the future can be decarbonized and awesome. You don't have to change your behavior. Because that's what we want to bring these models where it's like actually superior. That electric home is a superior experience. You don't have to go to the gas station. Your cost is cheaper. You're not having to use power. It's from the sun. You don't have to conserve. You can program your smart stove to get the coffee cooking in the morning. I mean, it's arguably on every dimension a better future. We do not have to sacrifice to do it. Okay, so here's another one. I'm really proud of this one. So in Oakland, we're still burning like jet fuel in the city. We still have these dirty power plants that are in disadvantaged communities and are creating horrible pollution. So this is in Alameda. We have just won a contract to replace this by putting solar on low-income housing units. So solar and batteries on low-income housing units. So this is another thing. If we could coordinate this, we can site it in great places where we actually need this across the entire system. And so what we're doing from a business model standpoint, the business school folks will appreciate this, is we have 2 parallel paths. We're not waiting for all this regulatory change and to get real credit for these virtual power plants. We're going over the top direct to consumers to just say, we're going to lower costs as much as possible and provide a solution. So we're going to put as much solar and batteries as we possibly can. At the same time, we want to advocate for all these programs so that we're not building those 2 infrastructures, so that we're setting up the right programs so that they can talk to each other, so that we have a smarter infrastructure across the country and we can help us decarbonize. But it's slow going, to be honest. So we have to really push the business model to go direct to consumer over the top, and then hope we get smart enough to coordinate those instead of encouraging people to basically just pull off the grid. Like I said earlier. Because that's a wasted system. Then you're going to have an overbuilt system where you're going to have too much distributed resources, and you're going to have too much centralized resources because people don't need it anymore. So this is Oakland. One other, that's the same one. This is Puerto Rico. I went to Puerto Rico after the hurricane. And 60 days after the hurricane, there was half of the fire stations still didn't have power, like half. in the territory. And so they couldn't get 911 phone calls. I mean, this is 60 days after. So this is me, and she's like a well-known race car driver doing the work, putting some panels on a, by the way, I was like pregnant too in this one. I didn't know it. And I was like, oh, Zika. My doctor was so mad at me for going to Puerto Rico. So what's interesting about this, then Puerto Rico they've had tons of power outages since then. And our fire stations can be centers for resiliency, centers for the community. They can get their communications, they can get their 911 phone calls. And then in this last earthquake where a lot of people had power outages, all of our systems, I think we had a 98% rate of working with the power off for our solar and battery systems in Puerto Rico. So again, mission critical stuff. And if we can coordinate this, see, this is what we're going to, PG&E and the government of California, put subsidies right now for people who have medical equipment where they need it. And like we can put batteries in overnight right now. And so then you don't have as much pressure to turn the power off when you need to turn the power off to make it safe for people, because that's what they have to do. So there are these ways to go about it. We just need the will to do it. I'm almost done. This one is also pretty cool, the LA. So the mayor of LA, Eric Garcetti, anybody familiar with him? He's pretty cool. He's like really refreshing guy. Not afraid to kind of break things in the spirit of progress in a better world. And so they decided to decommission 3 gas power plants. And so we did the math for them to say, okay, we can replace one of those gas power plants with solar and batteries on 75,000 homes. So we coordinate together, you give us a subsidy, we can put it on these homes, we can coordinate it to make sure it's on disadvantaged communities as well, it's in the right spot, and we can do that cheaper. The subsidy you pay us to do that will be cheaper than another replacement for a new gas plant. And the reason why it makes sense in a city like LA too is like it's faster. So then as compared to trying to build desert solar and then build transmission to pipe it in, that takes a long time. That's very hard to do. And so we can do it right here, 75,000 homes replace like a big peaking gas plant tomorrow. Plus, you're giving a better power solution to the people who adopt it because they have the resiliency. So really a win-win-win stuff. Shouldn't be as hard as it is. So this is LA. These are our current customers. The yellow, it's kind of hard to see, but the yellow dots are our solar only and the purple dots are our solar and batteries. So that is our vision. We don't want to build 2 infrastructures. We want to help get a smarter infrastructure and bring people better power solutions. So is there anything that you wanted me to comment on, any of you guys? Okay.
I guess I am curious to hear a little bit more about what you're doing, if anything, outside the U.S. Is your plan at this point U.S. only, or you?
U.S. only for now. In many cases, and I meet with a lot of international utilities. The European utilities tend to be ahead on this stuff, and the oil companies. Actually, oil companies are paying more attention than the utilities in many ways because, again, for the utilities, it's harder for them to disrupt themselves. They have these incumbent business models, whereas the oil companies are like, wait, we're in the energy business. It's moving away from this. Let's figure out this new electrification thing. So, you see, and I think Shell, someone executive from Shell was here. I saw him on the speaker list. But so you really have a lot of the oil companies getting quite savvy at this stuff. In addition to many Asian conglomerates as well. But pretty much everyone I meet with, they believe it'll happen first in California. So the world is really very much looking to California to figure out how do you get to that fully electric home situation, and then how do you export that business model elsewhere. And California just made a mandate where all new homes have to have solar. They have to have a certain net zero emissions, and you really can only get there with solar. New York just passed something similar. So in many cases, I think it will happen in California, and that's a great privilege and a great burden to, get it right. And the bankruptcies obviously complicate a lot too.
So can we open things up for
Sure, yeah.
questions? I guess
Risk of mixing metaphors. I think that was a very powerful dynamic overhead smash, if I do say so myself.
I wish I was better at tennis than I was. But.
That's right. Any questions?
I did, by the way, for the IPO, I got Credit Suisse, when they were courting my business, gave me a racket from Roger Federer that he played with. It's pretty cool.
We usually start with student questions. Let's just do a few of those and then pick up the.
I guess I'd be curious to hear like what experiences you found useful as a student, and then maybe what class you try to take, what you try to learn if you were in school like now that could be useful for you.
Good question. I don't know. I've always just been really a advocate. Well, I had an interdisciplinary degree, STS. My focus area was math and art history, strangely enough. So I've always been sort of like a fan of, being a generalist in many ways. So like, society forces us to specialize often. And I think that it has served me well to be sort of a generalist in the multitude of challenges I have as an entrepreneur. So I think there's that. In terms of classes, I don't know. I mean, it's all the stuff. Are you a business school student? MBA student? Okay. Engineering student. Okay. Well, go to law school and fix all these regulatory things. No, I think in business school, and I talked about this when I was at the class. It's not as appropriate for this audience, but one of the things that I'm really grateful for is that this company and this role and doing this has challenged me so much interpersonally. It's been so taxing and so hard, and I really had to figure out, do I care? I have 5,000 employees now. I never worked at a company before. I've never had a manager. So I started the company when I was 27, and I had been at a VC before. I had to learn all of that. And so, for those of you guys that are business students, I mean, all that stuff they say about leadership and all that stuff, where in the moment I'm like, oh, that's so fluffy. But it's real. It's very real. And to a certain extent, you have to live it to figure out what you want to be, what the values you care about. Is this something you're going to get up every day for? Because, the sacrifice is enormous. My first daughter I had 4 weeks before the IPO roadshow. So I had to bring a baby to 30 cities and nurse a baby and do all the meetings, so it's been intense. So I feel like all the self-discovery stuff and just figuring out what you care about and being authentic to that is what's helped me the most.
Okay, over here.
Thank you so much for the fantastic presentation. So my question is about the customer acquisition costs.
Yeah.
Especially outside of California. So as you clearly said about the importance of reaching out to the customer, yes, we can't wait for policies to always change. But as you presented, the hardware costs are clearly declining. So could you talk a little bit about the challenges you anticipate for customer acquisition costs outside of California?
Yes. It's a huge problem in the US everywhere. And it's related to this problem about how complex we make it. So the single biggest thing we could do to lower the cost to acquire, and let me put some context around here. It can cost, the cost to acquire the customer, so all the spend and all the soft costs and the marketing and everything can be, in many cases, equivalent to the hardware cost. That's how crazy it is. That is not true internationally. And I do think a big piece of that is because we make it so difficult. You have to wait for the HOA to get approval. You have to go through multiple design reviews. You have to upgrade the panel to something that you don't want and it costs you extra money. They won't let you get a system as big as you want to because you have to have these setbacks off the roof. None of that stuff exists internationally, and what that does is it just keeps the momentum in the sale because it's a very momentum thing. If you think about yourself, if you decide to make this choice, you may want to do it. 90% of Americans want solar. It's a huge percentage. But it's just like there's inertia. Why do I do it today? I don't really want someone climbing around my roof. I'll do it later. Technology is getting better. So if you could sell somebody and then install it 5 days later, they don't think that. They don't rethink it. There's not the rework. So the single biggest thing I think we do, which we're working on, so we, Tesla, and a bunch of our other peer companies, we raised $29 million from the Department of Energy to put an online database, instant permitting. But we have to build that. We're having an engineering lab build that, so it's a third party. But then we literally will have to go HJ to HJ to get them to sign up to it. There's 18,000 of those. So that's what you can do for acquisition costs. But very good question.
So I have a question about the
Over here.
Oh, got it.
yeah. So I have a question about the regulatory framework as well. Talking about you know, is California. How do you think about expanding into fully regulated states? A complete no-go. How does that work on a state-to-state basis, and how does that influence your plans?
Yeah, the drivers of expansion tend to be, what's the value proposition? So it's a combination of how much sun is there, how expensive is incumbent power, and then is how attractive is the regulatory environment. So, you know, the more vertically integrated systems tend to be in the southeast, and they also don't get quite as much sun as you would think. I mean, Florida gets a lot less sun than, you know, Nevada, Southern California. And power is pretty cheap. So you're already pushing the economics a little bit on those two dimensions, and then with the regulatory environment on top of it, they've been quite effective at blocking our business model. So and if, you know, Florida is a perfect example. The utility in Florida, anticipating our business model, like we launched in 2009. They like passed something in the legislature to say no third party can own solar on a residence. So that happened, and then we had to spend money to get it overturned. They did a proposition where they spent $20 million calling it the Solar Bill of Rights or something pro-solar, but really it was anti-solar. So it's like you're faced with that a lot in a lot of places, which is unfortunate, but true. So I think it's hard in some of the regulated markets because the business model is so at odds with each other.
Let's go over there.
Hi, just a quick question. So it seems like the initial
Sorry.
proposition for accessing the consumers of and cost of basically using the federal tax incentives. So I was wondering on how much your early business models and then the evolution as soon as you knew potentially that the federal tax credit may run out or different regulatory changes you could foresee.
Well, I wouldn't use the word manipulated, but
In a nice way, in a nice way.
No, absolutely. The tax credit has been an important legislation. So there is a tax credit that you know, funds solar in this country. I will state that fossil fuels get 5x the subsidies of renewables globally. It's huge, the amount of subsidies and tax credits that are still given to fossils. So whenever I get that argument from people, I'm like, okay, let's eliminate all the subsidies and then we'll talk about it. Because it's just not the case. There's tons of tax credits and subsidies in the code for fossil fuel companies, which, by the way, persist in perpetuity, and ours is phasing out. So yes, the subsidy is an important part of the business today, but I would say we had even greater subsidies when we started, way bigger than the tax credit. The state of California had a huge subsidy, something like $15,000 per system, you know, back when we started, and we continue to grow through that because we've reduced our costs by about 10% per annum every year. So that's what we need to continue to do to phase that out. But I would still argue, and I would still argue, like, we should keep those tax credits in place. This is one of the policies that's working. It's like, we need more solar, we need more batteries, it's working, we need it now. As I talked about in the beginning, even if we make perfect decisions from now on, we're still hitting 1.5. So it's like, we gotta go. So don't mess with something that's in place. And one of my fears is that if we get a switch in the government and, you know, we want to have a more comprehensive solution like a carbon tax or something like that, which I'm all for, but it's like, that's not going to be fast. That's not going to be fast enough. So there's this temptation to say, like, hey, we don't want to pick winners. Let's just, like, it's not the government role to pick winners. I don't think we have that luxury. I think we have stuff that's in the market that's working. I think the tax credit, like the carbon tax, might be nice, but those take a while to phase through. And, you know, like this, you know, this Saul Bellow, I recommend this podcast to you guys. Like he mentioned, he's like, I think the carbon tax credit like really works for those edge cases. Like, you know, certain things are really polluting, maybe that doesn't make sense anymore. Something that maybe is a little more expensive, but like clean may make more sense. But to have whole scale broad change, it's going to take a little while for that to go into effect. So I don't think we can forget, okay, what's kind of working today, wind and solar. You know, we don't have to get too like purist to say like, okay, let's, you know, even let the market kind of decide. It's like solar is the resource. Like if you just look at how much power is needed, terawatts of power, and how much is produced, it's solar. It's got to be a huge percentage of solar. There's definitely an all of the above situation, but I just feel like for those of you guys that are voting, that tax credit is a good thing. And we need it for storage.
And now I think we need move on to the next part of the program. So
Okay.
we have the big celebration starting upstairs for all of you, and Lynn has agreed to answer questions from the business school class for about 15, 20 minutes right now, right here.
Okay, great.
Great, and let's thank her one last time.
Thanks, Jen.